Dividing. Decimals. Dividing. Decimals. I was caught in Mr. McCone's class. Dividing decimals. And there is no turning back. Dividing decimals. So today, in case you haven't figured it out, we're talking about dividing decimals. So if this was our decimal point, we're talking about how that decimal point could move around a little bit. We're going to talk about some strategies, some things that we can do in order to use that decimal and move it around. First thing, we got to go back to some language. Things that people have forgotten about. Definitely someone over here, she forgot about it. But that is what we call the different numbers when we're dividing. Okay? As you go through, we have here specific math language. We talk about math having its own language, like Genyongeha or English. The number that you're going to divide by something is called the dividend. The dividend. The number you're dividing it by is called a divisor. The answer is called a quotient. Okay? You might have forgot this, but we also do things like this. These are called factors, and this is called a product. Okay? The answer of a multiplication question is called a product. The answer of a division question is called a quotient. Okay? If we go through and look at this, there's two types of decimal division questions we're going to be looking at today. Okay? One is really simple, and the other is a little bit harder. So the first one, it looks at adjusted decimal in the dividend. There's no decimal over here in the divisor. Okay? Just in the dividend. So you're only dealing with one decimal. Over here, we're going to look at what happens when you have a decimal in the dividend and a divisor. Okay? So if we go here and we look at 32.55 divided by 15. Okay? First thing we do is we look and we say, okay, we've got the number 15. Will it work with our first number here, 3? Too small, right? 15 is much bigger than 3. You can't make a group of 15 with only 3. So we know we can put up our 0 above the 3. That allows us to put a 0 there. We subtract. 3 minus 0 is 3. We bring down the 2. Now, can 15 go into 32? How many times? I see people shaking their head. Twice, right? So we put the 2 up here because we know it will go twice. And then we do 15 times 2 is 30. We subtract, right? 2 minus 0 is 2. 0. After we subtract, we always bring down. Now we're at 25. Okay? Can 15 go into 25?
Yes.
I see yes. How many times? 2 15s, I think, are 30. We already know that. That would be too much. So how many times could it go in? Once. We then do 1 15, or 15 times 1. We subtract it. 0, 1. We bring down our 5. Now, we're getting into a little bit more trouble, because now we're saying, okay, how many times can 15 go into 105? There's a few ways I could do that. I could pull out my calculator and see, right? I could think in my head, well, I know that 2 15s are 30. 2 is 30. 2 15s equals 30. So 4 15s are going to equal 60. 6 15s are going to equal 90. How do I get from 90 to 105? One more 15. So 7 15s are going to equal 105 right on. So our 7 can go up here, 105, and we can subtract it, and we're left with 0 remainder. Okay? This is one way in which we can do it. Are we completely finished our question? No, because we haven't done anything with this decimal yet. Okay? But here's the fun thing. When you don't have a decimal over here in the divisor, and you only have it in the dividend, right? We just divided it and we pretended there wasn't a decimal there at all, right? We just went through normal division. It was like this. We just did that. But we know there really is a decimal here. So if there's only a decimal in the dividend, you just have to bring it straight up. And you're done. So 32.55 divided by 15 is going to equal 2.17. How do I know that I'm right? Well, I know that 15 goes into 30 twice. So I know that that's probably pretty close, right? I probably know if I estimate and look at it that that's probably a right answer. Because I know that 15 can go into 32 at least twice with a little bit. Right? So that is probably right. Now, when we look at it with a dividend decimal and a divisor decimal, things change a little bit. But just like this, I can actually pretend those decimals aren't there for right now. If I pretend those decimals aren't there the exact same way that we just did, instead of this being 1.5, I just pretend it's 15. Exact same. And I go through the exact same thing I did. 15 can't go into 3. Right? We put a little times. We subtract it, it's 3. Bring down the 2. We know that 15 can go into 32 twice. And it's 30. We subtract it. We're left with 2. Bring down the 5. Georgia, how many times can 15 go into 25? Once this time. Oh, good. Right? It's 15. We subtract. We're left with 10. Bring down the 5. We know that it's a 7. Goes in perfectly. We subtract it. 0 remainder. Right? Now, whenever we're dividing, that's easy enough for us to do. We just pretend there's no decimals. And then in the end, we go, wait a sec. We know that there still is decimals. Right? So here's the trick when you have decimals in both. You need to make this into a whole number. How do you do that? How do you make 1.5 into a whole number? Because right now it's 1.5. How can you make it into a whole number? Jess? Huh? Well, we could round it, but we're not going to because we just want to move a decimal. How do we move the decimal to make it into a whole number? Georgia?
Put the decimal on the end.
So if we just move this decimal over one spot, right? 1.5 becomes 15. But if we do that here, where else do we have to do it?
In there.
We've got to do it to here, right? And then it goes straight up. And it becomes 21.7, right? Whenever we're doing division with a divisor and a dividend with a decimal, you have to make a whole number over here, and that allows you to move your decimal on the side, right? So if you make your divisor into a whole number, and we know that every number is a decimal number, right, Joe? Like, it doesn't matter if the number is 23, 37, 199, 99, 99, 99. It doesn't matter what the number is. Every single number that we have is an actual decimal number. So 23 is actually 23.0, 37.0, 199,999,999 is actually just a decimal with decimal 0. But remember, we talked about how mathematicians are lazy and they never put the decimal zeros on if they don't have to, right? So that's okay for us to do that, and that's okay for us to understand every number is a decimal. So even if you get something like, well, most of the time the numbers that we've been dividing already are decimal numbers, but we don't put them in there. If we wanted to, we could. We could say 685 divided by 5, right? Goes in one time, 5 subtracts 1, bring down the 8, 18, goes in 3, 15, right? 1, 2, 3, bring down the 5, 35, 7, 35, 0 remainder. We could look at it like this. We could say, oh, wait a second. Let's put in our decimal. Let's throw on a bunch more zeros. Well, okay, let's not stop there then. Well, let's bring down this 0. Can 5 go into 0? No. 0. Subtract 0. Bring down another 0. Can 5 go into 0? No. Okay, it's fine. 0, subtract, 0 remainder. Right? So our 685 divided by 5 is still the same. You still have it as decimals and zeros, and every number is a decimal. We just don't always view it as that. We don't always think of it that way, right? But when we're dividing with decimals, we got to start to think of those numbers more as decimal numbers. Make sense? Dividing. Decimals.